to this IASA lecture, High Jinks in Arabia by William Facey. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome you. My name is Jose Carvajal Lopez. I am the vice chair of the IASA, and I'm going to introduce the speaker and the moderator very quickly, because it's not me who you want to listen to tonight. So just to remind you, all, for people who don't know, the IASA exists to promote research relating to the Arabian Peninsula, archaeology, history, epigraphy, languages, ethnography, geography, etc. We do this by awarding research grants, producing publications or supporting publications, disseminating news of new research, and especially organizing lectures like this, and in particular the Seminar for Arabian Studies every year. Today, for this lecture, it is my pleasure to introduce you William Facey, who is a historian of Arabia, former publisher and museum planner. He's been working in Arabia and different countries of Arabia since 1974. He has planned and has been research consultant in numerous projects in museums and exhibitions. He's also a very accomplished historian in Oman, in Saudi Arabia, in the Gulf States. For years, he ran a publishing house called Arabia Publishing, which specializes in books about the history and culture of all parts of Arabia. And now it's part of Medina Publishing, which is the editor, the publisher of the books that we are presenting today. Amongst the things that Will did in the 70s and 80s, he worked on several of the Northern Arabian locations that were visited by two explorers, Charles Huber and Julius Euting. Will has already published a book about Huber, Charles Huber, France's greatest Arabian explorer, in 2022. And this is, according to someone as relevant for this field, like Michael McDonald, this is the best biography of Charles Huber. And now today he's introducing to us, he's going to talk to us about his new publication. He's going to talk to us about the other explorer, Julius Euting. So that's for William Facey, who's the speaker. Let me briefly introduce you also the person who is going to moderate, Professor Michael McDonald, Research Associate of the Khalili Research Center and Honorary Fellow in Wolfson College in Oxford and Fellow of the British Academy. Michael works on languages, inscriptions, and history on pre-Islamic Arabia, and on topics related to literacy, ancient history of nomads, pre-Islamic Arabs. Amongst his current projects, I'd like to highlight the online corpus of the inscriptions of ancient North Arabia, which he founded and now co-directs with another member of the IASA, Professor Ahmad Al-Jalal, who is also Michael has been the mentor of Ahmad. And Michael is also the co-director of the Badia Epigraphic Survey, which records thousands of inscriptions in the Basalt Desert in northeastern Jordan. He's also the leader of the UK section of the Saudi-British-German project Epigraphy and Landscape in the hinterland of Taima in Saudi Arabia. So, as you can see, a very accomplished scholar, and we have the immense pleasure of having him as a moderator and discussion with Will Facey this evening. And now, without further ado, I'll leave you with William and Michael, and I'll just stay in the background, and I'll pass the slides when I'm required to do so. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good evening, everybody. I apologize for the delay. I blame the computer, or possibly my incompetence, I'm not sure which. But anyway, thanks to Jose for taking the show and showing it on his screen to us all. Anyway, High Jinks in Arabia, Julius Euting's epigraphic adventure in 1883 and 1884. Now, there isn't much humor in Arabian travel writing, it seems. Before my long involvement with the Arabian notebooks of Julius Euting, I would have said there was only one author capable of playing his Arabian experiences for laughs. The opportunist John Friar Keene, who went to Mecca and Medina in 1877 and 1878. Like everyone else, the indestructible Keene had a hard enough time, so that even he was only occasionally able to see the funny side. At about the same time as Keene, Charles Doughty was traveling in northern Arabia. His capacity for enduring hardship and destitution, as recounted in his Travels in Arabia Deserta, is legendary. We shouldn't be surprised that this book, masterpiece though it undoubtedly is, contains no comic episodes. Doughty's significance for Julius Euting was that he was the first person to record the Nabatean inscriptions at Madain Saleh. Doughty's visits to Hail were followed almost immediately by that of Wilfred and Lady Anne Blunt, who produced a stylish, important, and it also has to be said, humour-free account of their North Arabian journey. Then, in 1880, came Charles Huber on his first Arabian exploration. Huber discovered ancient inscriptions and remains at Tema and at Al Hayat, and became the second European to report Nabatean inscriptions at Madain Saleh, though he was unable to record any. Julius Euting was by then making his great name as a Semitic scholar in Strasbourg, Huber's hometown, and it was Huber and Doughty's finds that rekindled in Euting a long-held ambition to go to Arabia. When Huber made plans to return to Arabia, Euting contrived to join forces with him. The two men set off just a couple of years later in 1883. Euting kept a detailed daily record of his experiences and epigraphic discoveries in a series of notebooks that are lovingly preserved in the library of Tübingen University. Huber had modest funds from his French sponsors, while Euting's German backers had been considerably more generous. Added to which, Huber's money was delayed, with the result that he was financially dependent upon Euting. As we all know, no good deed goes unpunished, and this was just one of several reasons why Huber grew to resent Euting. Another reason, and the inspiration for this talk, was Euting's playful and irrepressible personality. This shines through the diary that he kept of his Arabian journey. At once scholarly, recording his finds of inscriptions and graffiti, and also highly personal, recording his highs and his lows, the risks he took, and the many antics he performed. It is his fun and games en route that mark Euting out as the joker among Arabian travellers, a quality which Huber lacked, and which he almost certainly found irksome. Pass, please. Thanks. In contrast to the solitary and single-minded Huber, Euting was extremely sociable. His many friends testified to his boyish character, his impish sense of humour, his love of storytelling and mimicry, his talent for entertaining children, and his penchant for dressing up. His extrovert and fun-loving nature would find expression in the party tricks and gymnastic stunts he performed during his Arabian adventure, and especially in the hijinks in Hail, designed to alleviate the boredom of the 13-week delay there. Euting's background was German and Protestant and upper middle class. Huber, by contrast, was French, Catholic, and working class, and had once been jailed for dishonesty. Euting was born in 1839 in Stuttgart, the Swabian capital of the then Kingdom of Württemberg, into the well-connected family of a senior civil servant. Clever boy, he was educated in a Protestant seminary where a career in the church was envisaged for him. However, he developed instead an interest in Greek, Hebrew, and other ancient languages. His student career concluded with a thesis on a surah of the Quran, and he was already beginning to think about a trip to Arabia. Having got a job as a librarian at Tübingen University, he spent much of the late 1860s traveling to Greece and Carthage, where he developed his expertise in Punic inscriptions. In 1872, a year after the German takeover of Strasbourg during the Franco-Prussian War, he moved there to take up a post as librarian at the newly founded Kaiser Wilhelm University, a move hardly likely to endear him to a French patriot such as Huber. He was soon awarded a chair at the university, and later in 1900, he became a director of the library. This, since then, has evolved into France's second national library, the Bibliothèque Nationale et Universitaire. Euting soon became well known in the city as an eccentric scholar with a taste for Oriental dress and decor. Diminutive in stature, being only about 5 feet tall, as well as intellectually brilliant, he was known as the little 16-language guy, the Zexé Sprochemenele. I won't try that again. His formidable command of ancient languages led to his specialism in Aramaic and its cognates, added to which he had an eidetic memory, a very useful talent for an epigrapher, and he was also a highly competent draftsman and landscape watercolorist. These skills were combined in his travel notebooks, giving them a flavor and character absolutely unmatched by any other Arabian travelogue. They provide a unique visual record of people and places in northern Arabia at a time when Ha'il, under its able emir, Hamid ibn Rashid, was eclipsing the power of Riyadh and the second Saudi state to the south. Pass, please. Euting also had many interests outside epigraphy and archaeology. A notable aspect of his personality was his love of nature and his lifelong passion for the great outdoors. Today, we would call him an environmentalist. His favorite pastime was hiking in the Black Forest, and after his move to Strasbourg in the Vosges range of hills southwest of the city. He founded and chaired the Vosges Ramblers Club and co-wrote the guidebook to them. He's memorialized to this day in a grand tower on top of one of the summits. He also wrote a guidebook to Strasbourg Cathedral, which is still obtainable. Throughout his life, he was quite the daredevil with a taste for climbing, horse riding, ice skating, and even ballooning. And this risk-taking streak was another quality of his that added spice to his Arabian adventure. He died in 1913 at the age of 73, laden with academic honors, his career having coincided almost exactly with the German occupation of Alsace-Lorraine. He was buried at a scenic location in the Black Forest, and in a playful gesture absolutely typical of the man, he made provision in his will for the hostelry nearby to offer a free cup of his favorite beverage, coffee, to visitors there on his birthday, the 11th of July, an occasion that still these days provides a great opportunity for members of the Julius Euting Society to gather and celebrate his life. Now, on screen, you'll see a couple of examples of Euting's great skill as a watercolorist. Perfect Arabian sandbook at El Wedge. And earlier in his trip, he did a lot of drawings of mountain scenes, of which this was a particularly fine one, east of Ha'il. How surprising it is that, as far as I know, and maybe someone will correct me about this, there exists no proper biography in German or any other language of this highly gifted, multifaceted, and colorful individual. Pass, please. Now, here is a map of the Arabian journey of Euting and Huber. Euting's in red, starting at Damascus, went down towards Heil, and then west along the southern Nafud to Tema and Al-Ula and Madain Saleh, and finally to Al-Wedge on the coast. Now, they didn't spend all their time together, and as you can probably see, if you can see the map, that Euting did the bit from Al-Ula to Al-Wedge at the end on his own. We'll come to that. And Huber, of course, did lots of other journeys separately from Euting, which are in green. On the map on the right shows that in a little bit more detail. Okay, Euting and Huber arrived in the Levant in June 1883. Huber already had a big problem. His main sponsor, the Ministry of Education in Paris, was vehemently against him traveling with a German. However, Huber was still waiting for the ministry's funds to arrive, and so decided in secret to go ahead anyway with Euting, who had plenty of money. Which meant that Huber had to pretend that he was not really with Euting, despite a report appearing in the Strasbourg press at the same time, trumpeting Professor Euting's role as leader of a joint expedition with Huber. There ensued an awkward dance, during which the two men visited sites in Lebanon and Syria, while having to maintain the fiction that they were not really together. One of them would go on ahead and wait for the other to catch up, for example, at Palmyra. In letters to Paris, Huber presented Euting as merely an annoying hanger-on who kept turning up and getting under his feet. This charade, played out for the benefit of the French consul in Damascus, Euting seems to have been happy enough to go along with. Perhaps he found it amusing, all part of the play acting that would be the hallmark of his Arabian adventure. Their semi-detachedness set the tone for the rest of their journey. Huber, feeling that he was the leader of an officially French expedition, made all the practical arrangements. Euting, meanwhile, who was putting up the money, regarded Huber just as a useful guest on his own German-funded expedition. When the time came to set out from Damascus for Arabia, the pretense that they had nothing to do with each other was maintained. Euting set off alone for Jebel Druze, while Huber followed on a few days later. So Euting's journey began, as it would end, with him on his own for a while. On the very first day, he and his horse driver were waylaid and robbed by Druze bandits. They were lucky enough to retrieve their belongings through the good offices of a Druze sheikh, so all was not lost. But it had been a genuinely dangerous moment. Euting uses it as an opportunity to tell it as a funny story against himself, to show what a naive he was. He hadn't been up to dealing with the danger. At the end of his journey, it would be a different story. Pass, please. Now, this is a very nice example of Euting's ability at depicting scenes in Arabia, whether natural environment or villages and townscapes. When Euting and Huber reached the little oasis of Kaf at the northern end of the Wadi al-Sirhan, just inside present-day Saudi Arabia, they were met by three men sent up from Ha'il by the emir to escort them onwards. They were now under the protection of the powerful emir and tribal chieftain Hamid ibn Rashid. Huber then decided to make a quick trip back to Damascus with one of these men, whom he knew from his previous trip, to collect some firearms. So Euting was left kicking his heels in Kaf for 3 weeks. Being Euting, he decided to alleviate the boredom with some entertainment. He had the foresight, he alone knew why, to bring among various items a Polynesian boomerang. With this now, in the Arabian desert, he decided to amaze the natives. As an example of Euting's playfulness and showmanship, his description of what followed is worth quoting in full. In the evening, I fetched a boomerang and threw it in the air, out on the plain, causing it to return to me in a nice arc. This instrument naturally caused boundless amazement. The whole village poured out to see the new miracle. At a distance of 200 paces, I hurled the boomerang in jest at some women who were just running out of the gate. With loud screams, they fell to the ground, and when they dared to look up again, the piece of wood was rising up vertically above them and spinning back calmly to its point of departure. MashaAllah! By a strange coincidence, the boomerang struck one and the same man 5 times on its return, and with such force at the final stroke that it made a hole in his worn-out coat. Before dawn, the man showed up to collect his compensation. My gift seemed to him very generous. At any rate, he said that all the others were regretting that they hadn't been hurt as well. This comic turn was a foretaste of things to come in Hyle. Pass, please. There's a very nice watercolor here of one of the wells in Caf, actually, this one, where Euting used to take a bath every morning during his stay there. And on the right, there's one of the governor's fortress at Dumat al-Jandal in Al-Jav. Having marched down Wadi as-Sirhan to Al-Jav, the travellers next had to negotiate a crossing of the Great Nafud Desert. This was achieved without undue incident, and they reached the only habitation in the sands, the little oasis of Jubba. Here Euting got his first taste of ancient Arabian rock graffiti, and this is the point at which his Arabian epigraphic recording really began. From now on, most of the text he saw would be in scripts that he thought, understandably but erroneously, derived from ancient South Arabian. He was unable to decipher them, but recognized them as new to scholarship and recorded them in vast numbers. At Jubba, the two men visited Jabal Sulman, now famous as a trove of pre-Islamic rock art and graffiti stretching back to the Neolithic. Huber too recorded inscriptions, but he lacked Euting's expertise and artistic ability. Euting would often do him a favour by copying his own versions into Huber's notebooks. The way they went about their work was revealing. Instead of assigning different sections of the rock faces to each other so as to maximize coverage, they tended to duplicate each other's records. This veiled competition between them set the tone for all their later copying. Pass, please. The next stage of the journey took them to Hyle to pay their respects to their protector, Huber's old friend, the Emir Mohammed ibn Rashid. And here we have a picture of the center of Hyle with the famous Barzan fortress on the right. The idea was to enjoy the Emir's hospitality and plan their westward journey from there to Tema and Madain Saleh, which was Euting's main goal. As they made their way towards the capital of Northern Arabia in late October, the weather took an ominous turn, and rain fell in torrents. Little did they know that this was not a one-off event, but the first in a series of deluges that continued on and off throughout the winter. There was flooding everywhere and buildings collapsed. They would be marooned in Hyle for 13 weeks, unable to leave, until the 23rd of January, 1884. This delay reduced Euting to near despair. Huber was little help, spending much of his time in the palace, that's a Barzan here, hobnobbing with the Emir and his cronies. In December, Euting began to suspect Huber of trying to get rid of him back to Damascus. And in January, the Emir himself warned Euting that Huber was indeed planning to get to Tema and Madain Saleh without him. But Euting held his ground. As he records it, he indignantly protested, "I cannot believe it. How could Huber possibly entertain such an idea? Haven't I embarked on this whole trip with him with the sole aim of visiting those places? Has he not been my travelling companion, indeed my guest, from the very beginning? And that's how he'll remain until the end." His fears about Huber were well-founded. Huber was reluctant to share the finds of the expedition with Euting. and would carry on pretending to Paris that Euting was not with him. In one letter to a friend, after he and Euting had parted company, he told a lie that he had made Euting go off to the west, as he put it, without him, and had been unable to prevent Euting reaching Heil. May the devil break his neck, wrote Huber, for the annoyances he has caused me. But the most damning evidence of Huber's desire to obliterate his companion is a great silence. In Huber's notebooks recording his journey, which were published in 1891, there is not a single mention of Euting, or even of a European companion. Huber clearly wanted the world to believe that he had made the expedition on his own. How he intended to explain this, when he and Euting got back to Europe, is a mystery. As it turned out, he would not have to, because he would be murdered before he could leave Arabia. Huber's attitude meant that Euting spent much time on his own. Even on Christmas Day, he felt lonely and fantasized about Christmas at home. He amused himself by going on daredevil solo trips into Jebel Ajah, a very foolhardy thing to do, and by his own account, nearly came a cropper while crag hopping and ibex hunting. He painted peaks and rockscapes and did some sketches of Heil and its people. Having constantly to fend off the inevitable scroungers drove him round the bend and made him especially unpopular with the Qadr-in-chief and second most powerful man in Heil, the Emir's cousin, Hamoud al-Ubaid. Pass, please. Here we have, Euting was not nearly as good at painting people as he was at painting places, but he had a go occasionally. And here is the splendid master of ceremonies, Mr. Mustachios, Abu Shawarib, and the young chap on the right who succeeded Muhammad ibn Rashid as Emir of Heil. When Euting did visit the palace, it was almost always in the company of Huber, who enjoyed a close friendship with the Emir and seems always to have been welcome there. It was on these occasions that entertainments were staged. The Emir's men would perform party tricks and acrobatics, which provoked Euting, who one has to admit seems often to have been over-keen to claim a kind of European superiority, into showing that he could do better, climaxing in the single knee hang he performed for the audience. Next, please. Here on the right is Euting depicting himself doing a single knee hang, which is the gymnastic terminology for that. And on the left, a rather nice picture of a ravine in Jebel Ajah. Halfway up, you can just see a couple of ibex that got away from him. Next, please. Here's a cartoon of dinner in the palace. The third from the right, you can see that Euting is depicted Huber sitting next to the Emir Muhammad. And the second from the left, Euting is depicted himself, just tucked away next to the Emir of Bereda, who is next to Euting's bête noire, Hamoud al-Ubaid. Euting found the heir apparent, Majid ibn Hamoud, especially lively-minded and curious about European culture. He taught him successfully how to draw perspective, and also, on one hilarious occasion, how to sing Leonora's aria from Verdi's Il Trovatore, which the young prince seemed especially keen to master. Not explained why. And Euting describes it. The extent to which this gifted individual had remembered the tune correctly was remarkable. Every time he failed to hit the bass notes in the final passage, I would give him a good tap on the knee, shouting, "Deep, deep, amiq, amiq." It caused a good deal of merriment. Majid's younger brothers imitated me. Whenever the finale was coming up, they would jab their index fingers in the air and shout crossly, "Amiq, amiq." Euting also alleviated the boredom by some ill-advised antics, singing and laughing in public, and on one occasion celebrating his sister's birthday by dressing up in all his finery and parading through the streets. This provoked a summons to the palace to see what he was up to. On another occasion, he enlivened a party given in his and Huber's house for the Emir of Buraidah by setting off a sequence of firecrackers that he had contrived to make himself, to universal astonishment. The time in Hail was also punctuated by a certain amount of serious epigraphic searching. Euting and Huber made trips to Jabal Ajah and Jabal Jildiya, where they recorded a rich haul of graffiti. They were also informed by a local preacher of an important inscription to the southwest of Hail at Jabal Sarra. So when at last, on the 23rd of January, the two men were able to set off westwards with their Arab assistant, Mahmoud, and a single guide, to make the journey to Tamar and Madain Saleh, it was to Jabal Sarra that they went first. Conditions at night were so bitterly cold that their guide Haylan would resort to defrosting his feet in a warm stream of camel urine. Next, please. And here on the left, we can see some of the inscriptions and graffiti at Jabal Sarra, including the one that the preacher in Hail told them about in the top half. And on the right, a jolly cartoon of Haylan warming his feet. Jabal Sarra turned out to be the first of 5 extremely rich sites of pre-Islamic epigraphy. Euting gives a vivid account of this desert journey along the jabals fringing the southern Nafud, and makes many references to Huber, so disproving Huber's fraudulent claim that they had separated after Hail. Most notable among the sites were the spectacular Mahajja formation and the huge rock face of Al-Lakat. They journeyed to those via another important spot, Jabal Misma, Erqub, where among the early graffiti is a rock carrying both Huber's and Euting's signatures, so further disproving Huber's claim that he had sent Euting ahead without him. Next, please. There, if you look bang in the middle of this picture, you can see Huber's signature very obviously, and underneath it, Euting's in his typical style of signature, the one he always used, and the date 1884 next to it. Next, please. Here is some of the prolific rock art, some of it Neolithic, at Alai, which is the southern point of Jabal Misma. Next, please. Now we're at the spectacular cathedral-like, almost rock formation of Mahajja. Euting did several watercolors of this place. We could have the next one, please. So you can see just how accurate a topographical artist he was. This is the same view today. And Huber left his signature there. And a little bit of Arabic underneath Huber, I think that's supposed to say Mahmoud, which is the name of their assistant, Arab assistant, who accompanied them. Next, please. Euting recorded hundreds of graffiti as they went and was sometimes overwhelmed by their sheer quantity. "O Lord," he exclaims at Al-Lakat, "be sparing in your blessings. On a rock face, perhaps 200 meters long, we found hundreds and hundreds of inscriptions. I confined myself to copying the better preserved ones, 150 of them." Euting, still unable to read these inscriptions, but recognizing that they were new to science, continued to make copious epigraphic records. Next, please. Like this. This is a particularly interesting spread from his notebooks because it shows various creatures that are extinct now in Arabia, including, rather amazingly, a wild boar on the left there, and then, of course, an ostrich at the bottom. And that almost certainly aren't any hyenas left in central Arabia. It was these copious epigraphic records that enabled his pupil, Enno Littmann, to decipher them as representatives of a new group of scripts, hitherto unknown to scholars. These scripts came to be known collectively, but misleadingly, as Thamudic. They are now classified into varieties of ancient North Arabian. At Tama, which they reached on the 15th of February, they scoured the town for more inscriptions. On the 17th, a local man took Euting to a building where he was shown a stele lodged upside down in the ground and serving as a door jamb. It didn't take him long to recognize this as an Aramaic inscription of the first importance. When, in a state of high excitement, he told Huber about it, the Frenchman handed over some of Euting's money for it. Huber then, according to Euting, claimed to have seen this stone on his 1880 visit, but had failed to recognize its significance, according to him. Euting naively fell for this. What is incontrovertibly true is that Huber had never once mentioned the stele to Euting before, nor had he referred to it in any of his reports on his 1880 journey. Nor had he rushed to find it on arriving at Tama. True, his 1884 expedition notes include a drawing of this inscription, but this was done not by him, but by Euting. Huber never once mentions the stele until it is carried to him from the site. It's obvious that he had never seen it before, and that Euting, not Huber, was its true discovery. Before they set out, they had agreed in writing that all their inscription finds should go to Paris, except for a single one, which Euting would be entitled to choose for himself. So not surprisingly, Euting now chose the stele and staked his claim to it verbally. Next, please. Here we have the famous stele, now, of course, in the Louvre. Next, please. And here on the right, we have a very revealing little drawing, which Euting included in the letter he wrote to Noldiker from Alwej in April 1884, showing in the middle there the exact position of the stele as he found it, upside down, half buried in the ground, forming part of the door jamb of the building. On the left, I show you a nice engraving of Euting as the grizzled Arabian traveller that he had become. Next, please. Euting on the left, this is his original drawing in his notebook on discovering the stele. And on the right is the one in Huber's notebook, which this makes it really obvious that Huber didn't draw that. It was drawn by Euting, as Euting later confirmed. Huber was firmly resolved to keep the stele for France. He wrote as much in a letter to Paris a couple of months later, and his determination helps to explain why he remained keener than ever to shake Euting off. After a short return trip to Tabuk, where Euting masterminded another round of party games and party tricks in the Pilgrim Fort, the pair returned to Tama and packed up half a dozen inscriptions, including the stele, to await their return from Madain Saleh. Next, please. Is Euting's depiction of the party, the fort, an evening's musamara, he calls it, an evening's entertainment. Next, please. And he did some very nice pen and wash drawings of buildings. This is one of the best ones of the inside of the fort at Al-Akhdar. The two then set out from Tama to Madain Saleh and Al-Ula, leaving their inscriptions at Tama. But then at Al-Ula, Huber dropped a bombshell, telling Euting that he would not be welcome back in Heil, and that he should therefore carry out his inscription copying and head off homewards on his own, either via Jeddah or direct across the Red Sea. Huber himself would go to Jeddah before returning to Heil to collect their inscriptions and other belongings. Part of Huber's calculation must surely have been that in this way he would gain sole control of the inscriptions they had so far collected. including the Stele, waiting for him back at Tamar. It was true that Euting had made himself unpopular in Heil, but he still reports being shocked by this unexpected news. His understanding had been that they would return to Heil from Adainsale, and that is why they'd left all their baggage in their house. Despite that, he very soon accepted it. There was, after all, one big advantage. He would be able to return to Europe before Huber and publish the Tamar Stele and all his squeezes of the Nabatean inscriptions before the French could do so. And this is exactly what came to pass, just as Huber had feared, and to the infinite chagrin of Ernest Renan back in Paris. Meanwhile, Huber left Euting at Al-Ula and went back to Adainsale himself to copy the Nabatean inscriptions on his own account. Euting was now on his own and set about recording as many as he could of the inscriptions at Al-Ula. He found that he was still an entertainer, albeit an unwilling one, of the crowds that kept following him around and getting under his feet. Next, please. And here we can see him at the top, standing on the back of his stalwart helper in Al-Ula, a chap called Marzouk, and also shimmying up a palm trunk ladder to reach another inaccessible inscription. Next, please. And here, on the bottom left here, there's another crowd waiting for Euting to appear out of that window at the top to record the inscription, which we can see him doing on the right, with Marzouk holding onto his legs so he doesn't fall out. Next, please. Of course, while they were at Al-Ula, they went to the ruins of Dedan and Khareba. And picture on the left, nice little sketch of them returning from their visit. And on the right, the famous lion tombs of Dedan. Huber and Euting finally parted company at Adainsale on the 27th of March, and Euting set about making his own squeezes of the tomb inscriptions. Then he left for the Red Sea, setting off from Al-Ula with a couple of guides, making for Al-Wajh. Next, please. And here he is. He had a very fruitful time at Adainsale, copied almost all the Nabatean tomb inscriptions and made these paper squeezes of the type you can see on the left of them, managed to get them all back to Europe. And this one and 28 others were published in his, very quickly published in 1885, in his Nabatäische Inschriften aus Arabien, a very handsome book, which I recommend if you can get hold of a first edition. On the way to Al-Wajh, Euting very nearly came to the same sticky end as would befall Huber 4 months later. He and his party were ambushed by tribesmen, and this time Euting, who was now feeling very alone and vulnerable, was unable to make light of the misadventure. He used his gun in the dark and very probably killed a man, if not two. When he got back to Strasbourg, he learned that Huber too had been attacked while trying to get back to Heil from Jeddah. Huber was murdered by his Bedouin guides near Rabe on the 29th of July, 1884. Euting had not only proven himself able to take care of himself this time, but had also been very lucky. This time he had risen above the dangers of the desert, but it had been a very close shave. And by now, he was no longer in the mood to make light of it. Huber's death marooned the Tamar Stele in Heil, sparking the imbroglio that added an archaeological dimension to the tension between France and Germany. Diplomatic ructions eventually led to Euting's friend, the Dutch scholar Christiaan Snoek Hugronier, being expelled from the Hijaz by the Ottoman authorities, urged on by the French vice-consul in Jeddah, Félix de Lostelot. Snoek had arrived in the Hijaz shortly after Huber's murder in order to carry out his famous study of the Muslim pilgrimage, And just as the French vice-consul was gearing up to recover Huber's body from Rabe and his possessions from Heil. As a friend of Euting, Snoek at first supported the Germans' claim to the stele, but backed off once it became clear that the French regarded him as a threat and had the power to undermine his project in Mecca. Though largely innocent of meddling, so far as one can judge, the damage had been done by his initial support for Euting, and he was eventually forced out of Mecca just before the actual pilgrimage of 1885. Whose claim to the Tamer's stele was valid? In our book, I present a forensic examination of the evidence for who first found it and which country, France or Germany, was entitled to its possession. There's no time to go through the arguments in detail here, but one has to start by treating these as two quite separate issues. In brief, there can be little doubt that Huber did not see the stele on his first journey in 1880, as Renan would later claim. For the reasons given above, it is obvious to me that Euting was its true discoverer. But I do, on the other hand, look forward to someone proving me wrong. As for who was entitled to the stele at the time, my opinion is that France's claim was the stronger. Even though the stele had been discovered by Euting and paid for with his money, it was the French vice-consul and his Arab agent, Si Aziz, who went to the trouble and expense of fetching it from Heil and bringing it to Paris, enduring many indignities in the process. For the French, of course, the prize was worth the trouble. There was massive public interest in the recovery of ancient inscriptions from the lands of the Bible, and enormous prestige was conferred by their acquisition. The Tamer's stele took its place as one of the prized possessions of the Louvre, and I think rightly so at the time. As for who is entitled to it now, that is another question again. When it comes to the continued retention by collections in the West of the heritage of other countries and cultures, attitudes are shifting fast. It will be interesting to see whether there is ever a move to return the Tamer's stele to its country of origin. In conclusion, it's no exaggeration to say that taken together, the discoveries of Doughty, Huber, and Euting laid the foundation of the modern archaeological study of Saudi Arabia. But of the three, it seems to me that first prize should go to Euting. Not only was he the true discoverer of the Tamer's stele and the first scholar to publish a more or less comprehensive record and analysis of the Nabatean inscriptions at Dain Saleh, but his careful recording of hundreds, if not thousands, of pre-Islamic graffiti on his journey through northern Arabia laid the foundation for a whole new epigraphic field, the decipherment and study of the various scripts that we used to know as Thamudic and that we now know as ancient North Arabian. Dedanitic, Tamanitic, Dumaitic, Ismaic, Sapphitic, Tom Lira, where art thou? And also Thamudic, B, C, D, and possibly F. At the very least, we should give this colourful character credit as the founding father of North Arabian epigraphy. Next, please. Finally, our new publication. This is the result of a long and very enjoyable collaboration between Christopher Metcalfe of Queen's College, Oxford, Michael MacDonald, today, our moderator today, and myself, going back to 2011, an awful long time ago. The whole thing was made possible by the generous support of Baron Lorne Thyssen-Bornemisza and his Augustus Foundation, and by the wholehearted support of the manuscripts department at Tübingen University Library. So, next, please. Thanks to them, and also a big thank you to all of you for tuning in, and apologies for the delayed start. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Will. That's was absolutely fascinating.